Welcome back to Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. If you are just tuning in, we just finished talking about the two biggest stories in the NBA from the last couple days. JJ Redick officially hired as the head coach for the Lakers. He has all the tools he needs to succeed, but I'm not sure how much it's going to work if the locker room does not respect him. And the shocking trade that took place yesterday between the Bulls and the Thunder, where they traded Alex Caruso, where the Bulls traded Alex Caruso to the Thunder for Josh Giddy straight up. 1-for-1, no draft picks, nothing else. Excuse me. Just 1-for-1. A really shocking move if I am the Bulls. Not quite sure why they thought that was a good idea, but in this segment here, we're going to finish up our NBA coverage, talk a little bit about two contract extensions that took place over the last couple days. Pascal Siakam signs a 4-year, $189 million max extension, and Malik Monk also signs a max extension, 4 years, $78 million to stay with the Kings. We'll talk about what each of those players mean to each of those franchises, why they needed to stay if both of those franchises wanted to continue their success, and everything else surrounding that contract. But before we talk about that, remember that if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to GSMCPodcast.net. Leave a tip or donation with a message in it. That message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to add, go ahead and throw that in the comments section. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. Appreciate all of you guys for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Friday afternoon. But like I was saying, we are going to finish up our NBA coverage here with two big signing as Pascal Siakam and Malik Monk both sign extensions with their team. We'll start off with Pascal Siakam. It was a couple days older than Malik Monk's signing. He signs a 4-year, $189.5 million max extension to stay with the Indiana Pacers after the Pacers acquired him in a midseason trade from the Toronto Raptors. And Siakam was a huge part of their run. Obviously, the Pacers make it all the way to the Eastern Conference Finals this year, taking down the Knicks, taking down the Bucks on their way to do it, and really putting the Celtics as close to the rope as they had all season long, right? You could make the argument that the Pacers, even without Tyrese Halliburton, should have been up 3-1 in that series. Doesn't matter. They got swept. That's just the way it goes sometimes, but we have now an opportunity for the Pacers to continue to grow on what was a great season. I apologize. I don't know. Maybe it's the but anyway. They have the opportunity to grow from what was a surprisingly deep playoff run for them. They came in as a 6th seed. They obviously started off the season hot. Tyrese Halliburton looked like that MVP candidate. They add Pascal Siakam, and his numbers with the Pacers were awesome. Right, he comes to the Pacers after basically right at the midway point of the season. It's 39 games in Toronto, 41 in Indiana. He shoots 55%. That's up 3% from when he was in Toronto, and his 3-point shooting really took the huge jump, right? He shot 32% from 3 in Toronto. In Indiana, he shot 39%. That's a 7% jump. And in the playoffs, he was huge. Those games without Halliburton, and when Halliburton was kind of struggling a little bit to put points in, he was able to keep the offense moving. He was just the 3rd player in NBA history to average 35 and 10 points in each of his first 2 playoff games. Elgin Baylor and Wilt Chamberlain were the other two. He scored the most points in the playoffs for a Pacer since Paul George. That's in elite company in Pacer history right there. And it's the second highest deal by a Pacer. Second highest money, only behind his teammate, Tyrese Halliburton, right? This combination of him and Tyrese Halliburton were great. It worked really well almost immediately. And keeping those two together to continue to hopefully get better and continue to dominate an East that is ripe for a second team, right? You have the Celtics that are returning just about everyone. Now, it's going to be hard for them to return everyone, but, they're going to be able to, they're going to pay Tatum. He's going to get a $315 million extension. Crazy. They're gonna probably bring back Derek White. He's looking for a good amount of money. I'm not sure if they're actually going to be able to bring him back, but the Celtics are primed to be great again, right? The Celtics, they've already extended Drew Holiday. Al Horford's got a little left on his deal. Kristaps Porzingis has a little left on his deal. Jaylen Brown signed his extension last year. There are places where this Celtics team is primed to be great in the East. The Knicks, if they were healthy, they were that other great team in the East, but these Pacers, they were able to beat them. And keeping Siakam and Halliburton together, they're only going to get better as the years go on. That's a devastating 1-2 punch up high and down low. And with Halliburton's passing ability, the ability to find an open guy, and the spacing that Siakam brings with his 3-point shooting ability and ability to drive on the inside, really a threat at all three levels, is something that works really well with the way that the Pacers like to play the game. So keeping him is huge for the Pacers. The other signing, Malik Monk, he signs himself a 4-year, $78 million deal to stay with the Kings. He was a huge part of these Kings. And I know the Kings took a step back this season. A lot of that was because of injury. He was second place to Naz Reid in the NBA's Sixth Man of the Year voting this season. He had over 15 points a year and 5 assists. This is his max deal. He comes here. He is a huge. If the Kings wanted to continue to be a playoff team, like they kind of were on the fringe, especially in a West that we've talked about how deadly that West is. We kind of talked about it in the last segment with JJ Redick and the Lakers. The Lakers have some pieces, but they don't really have enough to put them over the top in a deep West. We saw Luka and Kyrie make it through a gauntlet to get there. The Timberwolves took down the reigning champs. They have a great team. The previous champions, the Denver Nuggets, right? They're sticking together. They're only continuing to get hungrier to try and get that second title. Wemby and the Spurs are coming. The Rockets are on their way up. The Kings are on the way up. The Warriors still have Steph Curry. They are probably on the way down, but they still have Steph Curry, so you can never count them out. Same thing with the Clippers. This is a stacked Western Conference. There is nowhere to hide in the West. And if the Kings wanted any chance of being relevant with this De'Aaron Fox era, they needed to keep a guy like Malik Monk with his great 3-point shooting. They already have. They've built a team on 3-point shooting, obviously, with their draft picks recently. Keegan Murray, a huge part of that as well. His deadly 3-point accuracy. And De'Aaron Fox, and like I said, the Kings took a step back last season. And a lot of that was just because the West got better. They were a top 3 seed, and they only lost 4 more games than they did the year before, and they drop all the way to the play-ins, right? I didn't even talk about the Pelicans when I was talking about the West, but the Pelicans are on their way up, right? We saw Zion finally play a playoff game, and what he looked like there, right? If he can stay healthy, again, health, that's always the X factor in any sport. We never know. But the West is going to be stacked for a very long time. If the Kings want any chance at all of being competitive in the West, they needed to keep Malik Monk. His value off the bench, he honestly probably should have won Sixth Man of the Year. Nothing against Naz Reid. I love Naz Reid, and what Naz Reid provides to the Timberwolves off the bench is great. But the Kings without Malik Monk are so much worse than the Timberwolves are without Naz Reid. And I think that's something that you have to think about when you're talking about these awards. I mean, there's a reason that he was second, right? He was still great. The Kings have a chance. I am a big fan of this Kings team. They're one of those like dark horse teams that don't really have that championship upside, but could cause a lot of havoc in the West and take out a contender if they get the ball to bounce the right way and they get their shots falling. They're one of those teams. I like this Kings team. I like De'Aaron Fox a lot. And I think if they're able, they don't really have the assets or the money to add that that next like superstar, but if they're able to add another superstar, if someone in the draft that they take hits, they could take that next step. And keeping Malik Monk was step one of that, because if they lose him, they're kind of back to square one, where they're kind of where the Bulls are right now. They've got a good team, but they're not contenders, right? The Kings are a little further along than the Bulls are, especially after that trade. But I do think that that this was a signing that needed to happen if you were the Kings. So both of these signings, I think, were great. Obviously, the max contract is what you're going to give to these guys that you need to keep so they don't hit the free agency market. And I think the max contract is something that's really cool in the NBA. But good job by the Pacers and the Kings keeping their guys, keeping that I won't say homegrown talent, because neither of those guys were drafted, but keeping that talent in-house and building a culture around it. I think that's huge. In our next segment, we are going to move off of the NBA and into the MLB for the rest of our show. We are going to talk a little bit about the trade deadline. It's a little bit early to talk about the trade deadline there, but we are going to cover it a little bit, especially with the outlook, the way it's looking in the NL specifically, with 9 teams right together, all within 4 games of each other in the wild card race. Only 2 of those teams are going to get spots, but 9 are right next to each other, and not all of them are going to be buyers, not all of them are going to be sellers, and some of them might flip-flop based on what happens in the next month of the season. So we'll talk about all of that and more coming up next here on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network.